Welcome to episode 11, Color and Education, from 28 Days of Color, presented by S.T.E.A.M Engine Academy. Today, we'll go over the history of the Tuskegee Institute, the first institute of higher learning for African Americans. Then we'll speak with Educator Jessica Rauf. Don't miss it. The Tuskegee Institute was founded by Booker T. Washington in 1881 under a charter from the Alabama legislature for the purpose of training teachers in Alabama. Tuskegee's program provided students with both academic and vocational training. The students under Washington's direction built their own building, produced their own food, and provided for most of their basic necessities. The Tuskegee faculty utilized each of these activities to teach the students basic skills that they could share with African American communities throughout the South. Booker T. Washington was born into slavery in Franklin County, Virginia on April 5, 1856. In spite of the fact that it was illegal to teach enslaved blacks to read and write, Washington was able to obtain a primary education and subsequently entered Hampton Institute in the fall of 1872. He proved to be an exemplary student and over the years an equally respectable teacher and speaker. The principal of Hampton Institute was so fond of Washington that he recommended him to a group of Alabama legislators as a viable candidate for director of an African American school that they wanted to establish in their state. In 1881, Washington became president of that Alabama school known as Tuskegee Institute, which he and fellow colleagues built from a little shanty and church to a major educational institution for blacks. Not long after the founding, the campus was moved to a 100-acre abandoned plantation, which became the nucleus of the present site. Teaching African Americans to use education to promote economic progress was a key issue in the late 19th century. Booker T. Washington taught many people who came from destitute backgrounds how to improve their lives by cleanliness, industry, thrift, diversified farming, painting and mending, family budgeting, and better planning. Washington's ideals set forth many practical concepts that helped the African American community to move from slavery toward integration in the greater society's economic system. His founding of Tuskegee Institute as a leading college for African Americans further solidified the role of vocational training or vocational education for the underclass. By 1891, Tuskegee Institute had grown to a campus that included over 540 acres of land and approximately 400 students. This was a huge increase from the 30 students who had started classes in a church building only 10 years before. In 1896, Booker T. Washington secured funding that opened a separate agriculture school at Tuskegee, thanks to the Slater Fund for Negro Education. He had the foresight to hire George Washington Carver to lead this school. As a result of Washington's work as an educator and public speaker, he became the most prominent African American leader in the United States between 1895 and 1915. In one of his most famous speeches called the Atlantic Compromise, which was given in Atlanta at the 1895 Cotton States and International Exposition, Washington spoke about the black struggle and quest for equality, stating, "In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress." Washington believed that it was economic independence and the ability to show themselves as productive members of society that would eventually lead black people to true equality, and that they should, for the time being, set aside demands for civil rights. There and elsewhere, his ideas were readily accepted by both black people who believed in the practical rationality of his approach and white people who were more than happy to defer any real discussion of social and political equality for black people to a later date. In addition, Theodore Roosevelt relied heavily upon Washington's advice when making black appointments. Washington's influence with the Roosevelt administration was much criticized, and cartoon caricatures of them were made in the papers. Washington's views were diametrically opposed to that of more radical beliefs held by Frederick Douglass and Northerner W.E.B. Du Bois. These two men and other critics of Washington's were disappointed that he de-emphasized racism, racial violence against blacks, and discrimination, and was later rebuked for being an accommodationist. In this same speech, Washington declared that African Americans must take responsibility for their own advancement and urged vocational training over academic studies, believing that the masses would earn a living by using their hands. He also favored both literacy tests and property qualifications for voting privileges, thinking that this would encourage African Americans to obtain an education and wealth. In 1905, Du Bois and other Black intellectuals, including two women, Ida B. Wells Barnett and Mary Church Terrell, formed the Niagara Movement in rejection of Washington's ideals. The organization's objective called for full citizenship rights for Blacks and public recognition of their contributions to America's stability and progress. Suffering from poor finances and a policy that restricted membership to intellectuals only, in 1909 the Niagara Movement became known as the National Negro Committee, which 1 year later adopted its present name, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. As the editor of the NAACP's monthly magazine, The Crisis, and as one of the organization's most prominent leaders, Du Bois continued to actively promote and protest discrimination on behalf of all African Americans. Tuskegee rose to national prominence under the leadership of its founder, Washington, who headed the institution from 1881 until his death at age 59 in 1915. Welcome back to 28 Days of Color. I am here with teacher Jessica. How are you this morning?
Hi, Miss Lauren. I'm good. How are you doing? It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. A little background on Miss Jessica. She has actually worked with my own children, and we were just remembering a few things that definitely are the same for them now as they were before, and thinking about what a good experience my daughter had with you and how much I appreciate that she had you. There were quite a few times when I was like, oh, I heard Miss Jessica's name. Thank you. So that's part of why you're here. You know, today's episode is color and education. And as a teacher, I just have a few questions for you. Okay. The first one is, how long have you been teaching? And what made you get into teaching?
Okay. I've been teaching for 12 years. In the classroom and outside the classroom. I was mostly an after-school program coordinator, so coordinating what we call expanded learning time, so time outside of school, spent outside of school time learning. And I also have done family child care, preschool. So I've been working with kids for a long time. And what made me get into teaching, I think it was always there. Even when I was a little kid, my grandma used to say, either you're going to be a teacher or you're going to have a lot of kids, one or the other, because I always liked being around kids. And so I think that's how that got started. And I don't think I'll probably end up doing anything else.
Right. Okay. And the next question, what do you think is your main message that you instill in your students?
I try to instill in my students that learning is a lifetime thing. Like I like to say, you're a student of life. You never stop learning. Even as teachers, we learn something every day from our kids and from life. So you're never, not too smart. Your learning never ends. You're always a student of life, and there's always something to be learned every day.
Right. I agree with that. So, Black culture, how is Black culture or teachings of Black culture embedded into your classroom?
That was a really good question. I was reflecting on that one because I've changed where I work. I used to work in Vallejo, and so predominantly Black students, and so you're not really thinking about, that's not a first thought of how am I embedding Black culture, because you're in the Black culture. But now I teach in Berkeley Unified School District, and even though it's diverse, there aren't a lot of Black educators. And so I find myself, just my presence in the classroom, as being a reflection of Black culture, because I'm a representation for them of what a Black woman is, and also giving them a safe place to come and ask questions about Black culture, about Black current events and what's going on, because they're very curious to know what's going on in the world and navigating that. So I'm a place for them to come and ask those questions also.
For sure. And I know how that feels sometimes, feeling like you're kind of representing our culture because we're the only ones there, and really being conscious of how we do things so that we can kind of put our best foot forward. I used to work in Berkeley too, and was kind of tricky for me taking on that responsibility that I didn't realize right away that I'd fallen into, and so I definitely understand where you're coming from with that. Okay. Now, what age are your students and what kind of activities do you have planned for Black History Month?
So right now my kids are first graders. And of course, everything is about Dr. Martin right now. So he's a great introduction into Black History Month for us. But what we have planned, honestly, I'm not sure yet because I like to go by what the kids are interested in. They're really into Ruth Actie right now. She was the first Black teacher in Berkeley Unified, and our former school name Jefferson is being changed to Ruth Actie. So maybe we'll dive into some of that, maybe learning about some more Black educators, Black professors, maybe George Washington Carver. I don't know. I'm getting ideas right now, so get some ideas.
Yeah.
But in the past, we used to do these grand Black history showcases where the kids would pay homage to Black artists. So, they would do Michael Jackson, or we would do like a Josephine Baker piece, or recite poetry, Maya Angelou. So those were like the big events for the after school program that the parents would really look forward to, seeing what we're going to do that year. So that's some of the stuff that we've done. It's always exciting. We always try to think, of course, the saying Black 365. So we're trying to learn about Black history all the time, constantly looking for ways to make those connections. But next month, show out.
Oh yes, yes we are. With that. So with that being said, how has the social unrest affected you personally in the past year, either as a teacher or just as Miss Jessica?
It's made me think a lot more about the future of our country and where things are headed. I have a daughter, she's 3, so I look at her and wonder, what it's going to look like for her. What is the political climate going to look like for her when she's my age? And also what the kids in my classroom and her and the younger generation, what are they going to do to affect that in the future? And just hoping that it gets better. I feel like we're like right at the tipping point. People are almost really can't take it anymore. And so usually when there's that much unrest, then there's, usually great change, hopefully great change.
Right.
But it definitely affects me, makes me, just think more about the future and what it's going to look like for our kids. And as far as in the classroom, like I said, the kids are aware of the climate. They have questions. They're wondering and they want answers. And it's hard because we don't have answers for them all the time.
Okay. Especially being in Berkeley. I mean, are you seeing demonstrations and protests? Are the kids being exposed to that, especially in Berkeley?
Yeah, most definitely. And they have a lot of questions that actually, when you think about it, are like really trivial. Not trivial, but they have questions about Black Lives Matter. And I remember them asking, why do we keep seeing signs of Black Lives Matter? And me explaining that to them. And just the kids are still so very innocent. They're like, but we're not white and you're not Black. You're brown, Miss Jackson, So, and I'm like, you're right. It is that simple, but it's not that simple. So yeah, they have a lot of questions. And with everything that just happened at the Capitol, they came back to school the next day with a lot of questions about what they saw on the news or heard. So it's also at this time kind of a good time to make those connections also about what are our voting rights, how does the government work as far as what are people's positions and things like that. And then once they kind of have that basis and can make that connection, then, we weave in the ethical part of we help make the laws too. And when we're not satisfied with something, we do have a right to protest it, but it has to be done in the right way. And again, that's a good segue into Black History Month and what is peaceful protesting, what's not peaceful protesting. And Um, so the unrest is definitely affecting my classroom right now. And having the freedom, sadly, through the pandemic of being at home in a very small cohort. I only have 4 students that and we meet in person. We're masked, but it gives me a little more freedom of us to explore those other topics that we wouldn't have time to talk about when we were in the regular classroom.
That's really powerful, and I'm also kind of um, happy about the fact that they've been exposed enough to ask questions, because I think when it comes to seeing their world, I don't want to feel like students aren't aware of what's happening because we're all at home. You know, they're young, but I think some of these, major events, they should, kind of tap into so that they can remember it when they get older. You
Yeah,
know, everyone kind of grows up with that "where were you when this happened" type scenario. And
yeah,
I think the more that we skip over what's happening, the less they can kind of process it. And so I'm really pleased actually to hear that they're able to feel comfortable to ask you these questions. You know.
yeah. That part has been a blessing, and yeah, history is bound to repeat itself if you don't understand it and you don't acknowledge it. So um, yeah, there's hope for the next generation, but we have to make sure we're fostering a space for them to explore that.
Right, right, for sure. So, as a teacher, have any of the social unrest come up in discussion? That was my next question. And you kind of answered that. So, I'm going to go on to the next. I don't mean to skip through your responses. What do you feel is important about working in education as a Black woman?
Like we mentioned before, the representation, just showing our own Black kids that like it's okay to have a normal job. It's okay to be a giver of the community. You don't have to always be an athlete or a lawyer or have this very high paying job to be considered successful, have a successful, happy life. Um, yeah, so that's important to me.
I agree. Now, how do you think it can affect students to be instructed by or be at the same school as Black educators, even if they're not in your class? How do you think just your presence affects them?
Um, for some kids, school is a safe place. They prefer to be there more than home. So just like I said, to have that representation of someone there in their community where they spend like 8 to 10 hours a day that looks like them and can relate to them is always good. Like so, I'm not directly in the classroom. I'm an after school educator, but even when I'm going through the halls in the daytime, there's kids that aren't even in my program and they're like, Miss Just, hi, just said hi to me. And you're like, okay, my presence does matter. Like you're saying, they're looking to you either because you look like them or you made a connection with them. So it's very important to have Black educators and support systems, support staff, excuse me, in the school.
Yeah, I can appreciate someone that you don't even work with saying, "Hey, Miss Jessica," because I know that the way I was brought up, a lot of times my mom would say, when you go somewhere, and you see someone that looks like you, say hello, speak, introduce yourself. Make sure that everyone is aware that you're there, and there's kind of this unspoken rule that we kind of look out for each other when we bump into each other out and about, especially when you're in a new place. Even when I was going to college, I couldn't leave without a list of all the cousins and relatives and friends of relatives that live nearby, because finding that support system, that pillar that you kind of could attach to and say, okay, here's a safe space. If I need something,
Yes.
I can go toward this person, and kind of just knowing that when I see that person, I'm like, if they're here, it's okay,
Yeah.
So I can appreciate what you said, and even knowing students that aren't necessarily in your class, right? What is something you want for the Black community in education if you had that control to change something?
Um, I believe I said, and I strongly think um, this is very big, is more Black educators in higher positions and positions that aren't just at the school level. So, administration, Black principals, Black superintendents, and even working in after school, I've seen the vast other positions that you can have in education that don't even have to be in the school, working with the state on helping to, make sure that policies are put in place for fair education, things like that. Equity and quality and programming and after school and summer camps. There's positions for that. There's so many other things that you can do besides just be an instructional aide or, the lunch lady or the secretary or even the teacher, that there's way more positions available for Black people in education, and that we really dive into those because we need to take over that sector too so we can get our fair share of the pie. As we know, we don't always get fair education and fair opportunities, so we definitely need more Black representation there.
Agreed. And finally, is there anything else you would like to share with our viewers? Anything that you would like to let them know of, just from you?
No, this is such a great show that you're doing, Ms. Lauren. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
And this is just like another testament of what comes out of the Black mind, creativity, and we continue to strive. We continue to find avenues, and we can't go one way. We're gonna go another to get the job done and accomplish what our life's mission is. So I hope you continue with that, and I'm very interested to see what the other days of Black, or can you say the name of the show?
28 Days of Color. So you are color in education.
I want to see what the other colors of education are looking like for the other days. So I'm excited.
Yes, ma'am. I'll be sure to I'll share the info with you so you can watch along with us. And I hope to see more of what you're doing in class and that sweet baby girl of yours.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this with me. I really appreciate you taking some time with me today.
You're welcome. I hope I get to see you soon.
Yes,
in person.
Finishing up our topic of education today, we're going to read Lola at the Library, written by Anna Mcquinn and illustrated by Roslyn Beardshow. Find out what a day at the library is like for Lola and her mom. Lola at the Library. Lola loves Tuesdays. On Tuesdays, Lola and her mommy go to the library. The library opens at 9 o'clock, but Lola is ready to go long before that. She puts all the books she borrowed last week in her backpack. Her library card is also very important. The library is not very far away, so Lola and her mommy always walk there. Lola and her mommy give back the books from last week. The librarian buzzes them through the machine. There is a special section in the library just for children. It is really cool. Nobody ever says, shh. Sometimes there is singing. Lola knows all the words and the hands for Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Sometimes there is a story time. Lola loves that. After story time, Lola chooses her books. In the library, she can have any book she wants. Lola likes stories with bears and anything with shoes. There are so many, it takes ages to choose. Mommy has some books too. She and Lola take them up to the desk. Lola must bring her books back in 2 weeks, but she will probably be back for more long before then. Lola and her mommy always get a snack after visiting the library. Mommy has a cappuccino and Lola has juice. Whenever Lola has been good, her mommy lets her taste the foam. Mmm. Then it is time to go home again. Every night after Lola is tucked in bed, her mommy reads her a story. It is the best way to end the day. The end.
One more again. Mas não. Mas não. Mas não. Havia espesso de havia espesso de havia espesso de a gente mas não vou sem te chamar havia espesso de havia espesso de havia espesso